Alright, Assassin's Creed 3. I've been looking forward to talking about this one for a long time. It's actually one of the games on the list I made when I first thought up this series over a year ago. While I've always been a pretty big fan of the Assassin's Creed series, I got a little burnt out on Renaissance Europe by the time Revelations came out in 2011, and have now only barely just started it, so when AC3 was revealed to be set in 18th century colonial America, I was pretty excited. Now, in case you can't tell by now, I really like stealth games, and Assassin's Creed's brand of stealth, which emphasizes blending into crowds over skulking in the shadows, grabbed me right away with the release of the first game in 2007. Assassin's Creed 3 introduced a lot of new items and mechanics, and contains one section that I always recall fondly when I look back on the game. The area in question, Fort Duquesne, is located near the northwest corner of the frontier in probably the most densely forested part of the map. This is important because while previous games in the series have featured unpopulated areas between their various cities, AC3 was the first to focus on wilderness as not only a major gameplay area, but one that's totally central to the identity of its main character. Interactions with trees in previous games were limited at best, but AC3 introduced the ability to climb them and leap from branch to branch out of eyeshot of most enemies on the ground below, a change to the series' formula that makes sense within the game's story. Because Connor grew up in the forest among his tribe, this new treetop parkour mechanic is totally natural for him and completely consistent with his character. Additionally, in an early mission playing as Haytham before Connor is introduced, you pursue Tio as she evades you in the treetops while you're stuck on the ground. Because Haytham can't climb trees like she can, this disheartening moment sets you up for the excitement of finally being able to climb and run freely in the trees as Connor later on, and frames the action as freeing and empowering. You'll feel this empowerment again at Fort Duquesne, where you can leverage the trees in and around the fort to sneak around above the guards. The fort has a pair of guards on elevated platforms in the treetops, and the difference in elevation means that guards on the ground can sometimes see you in the trees, but the wealth of foliage allows you to move about the fort with relative ease as you stalk your targets. Speaking of which, the game's other major gameplay addition for stealth is the introduction of stalking zones, areas of thick brush in which you can move while hidden, if a bit slowly. Before this, your only options for invisible movement were blending into a wandering group of townspeople or hiring a group of courtesans. The former didn't allow you to go where you wanted, and while the latter did, you had to avoid groups of guards whom the courtesans would automatically distract. The stalking zones add a welcome wrinkle to this by giving you total freedom of movement on the ground without being seen, but limiting you to a confined area. These patches of brush, which you'd expect to see in Fort Duquesne's forest setting, are littered throughout the fort and allow you to avoid patrols, assassinate nearby targets, and conceal the bodies of any guards you take out. It's satisfying to dart from cover to cover, and the limited ability to move amplifies the tension if you're momentarily spotted and a guard gets just a little bit too close while searching for you. Now, I can't talk about Assassin's Creed 3 or Fort Duquesne without spending some time on the rope dart, because it ties in very closely with both of the mechanics we just looked at. Essentially a knife on a string, the rope dart is my favorite weapon introduced in Assassin's Creed 3, and it's a great example of weapon design that fits a game's setting and themes while managing to be both versatile and balanced. It's useful both in stealth and open combat, and you frequently have the option of doing a slower kill that lets you keep the rope dart but leaves you exposed, or a quicker kill that leaves you safer but prevents you from reusing it. What's really cool is that it works particularly well with both the treetop parkour and stalking zones we already discussed, both of which are all over Fort Duquesne. When you're hidden in brush, pulling a target to you ends with you quietly assassinating them and hiding the body automatically, which is balanced by leaving you visible while you drag them into you. On a tree branch, you can choke out a target from above and let them down, or you can hang them from the branch, which is quicker but costs you a rope dart and doesn't let you hide the body. This relationship between the rope dart and these new environmental mechanics is why the rope dart is so closely connected in my mind with Fort Duquesne. Because the fort is totally littered with trees and stalking zones, you're given tons of opportunities to use the rope dart to its fullest potential, and since the game never actually tells you outright to use it, if you do, it's because you are thinking like an assassin. In fact, all the things we've looked at here are really just options, since you have a ton of freedom here, and that's kind of the point. All the forts in Assassin's Creed 3 are optional targets on the world map, each with the same set of objectives. You need to destroy its powder reserves and kill its captain before you raise your flag, taking the fort for the Patriots. You're not given any idea of how to complete them, leaving you to formulate your own plan based on the information you can gather about the fort. The main story missions are, in contrast, much more scripted and linear, which can be frustrating when trying to complete some of the trickier optional objectives. And seriously, who came up with the idea for these boats? The comparative freedom you have in taking over a fort encourages you to think like an assassin, figuring out the best way to get through it. What makes Fort Duquesne so unique and special to me is how it brings all these different pieces together. It uses treetop parkour and stalking zones to give you a feeling of empowerment, which makes sense considering the game's protagonist. Connor's familiar with the land, so he has an advantage against the foreigners holding the fort, and the game uses these new mechanics to communicate this feeling. It also serves as a fun playground for using the rope dart, which, as I've already detailed, is my favorite new weapon in the game. Most importantly, however, is that it does all of this without holding your hand, creating an open-ended puzzle that allows you to step into the shoes of an assassin and plan out how best to take the fort. Taken separately, each of these improvements is an evolution of mechanics established by previous entries in the series, but when they come together here, the result feels almost revolutionary. Thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this look at Assassin's Creed 3 just as much as I've enjoyed making it. As always, I'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions in the comments below, and I hope you'll join me next time when we take a look at another great level in gaming. Speaking of which, I gotta go see a man about a crowbar.